Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me for tonight's webinar. My name is David Hawkins. I am a specialist in international university applications. And over the course of this webinar, I'm going to give some information that will hopefully help you learn more about how students can make successful university applications to universities in the United States. The webinar is being recorded so that those who aren't able to make tonight's time can watch it via YouTube in due course. And as a result, I ask that you can keep your webcams off, keep your microphones muted, and indeed I won't be taking questions at the end. If you do have any further questions, please do contact me via email or through the telephone number below. There's also an inquiry page on my website, and I'd be very happy to speak to you individually or answer any questions via email. So I'm giving this talk in the context of my work as a specialist in international university admissions, and I have been doing this work now for a number of years, both working in schools here in the UK and internationally, and now as a private counsellor. It's my great pleasure to be a member of the International Association for College Admissions Counselling, an affiliated consultant to the Council of International Schools, a supporting member of the Council of British International Schools, and one of two professional members of the Independent Educational Consultants Association based within the British Isles. So hopefully that gives a sense of the body of knowledge and expertise with which I deliver this talk, and also hopefully there's some credibility behind what I'm about to say to you this evening. Before I delve into the nuances of the process, I want to just give a little bit of information about why so many students are studying in the United States. The best statistics that we have come from the UK's Independent Schools Council for outward mobility, and that study shows that of all independent school leavers in the UK last year, 5% of those went outside the UK university, and of that group of students, half of them chose to study in the United States, and they're doing so for some of these reasons. The United States has a huge number of world-class universities, whichever one of the ranking tables you look at, and some are obviously better than others, but they all are dominated by the United States. And it's in common cultural parlance to know of good universities like Harvard and Stanford and Columbia, UCLA and UC Berkeley, that people know about these universities. However, beyond that, there are many reasons why students may want to consider studying in the United States. There's a very different style of teaching and learning that goes on in US universities, and that can suit students who may find some of the process in the UK options or the European options not best suited for them. And that fits to the liberal arts system of education, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail. But students typically in the US system are going to have a much broader educational experience than they would do within the UK or indeed in Europe. Linking to that, we have a very different campus culture, the idea of school spirit, of participating in a wide range of activities, and particularly the athletic culture of sports in the United States is very different. From that, we get unrivaled extracurricular opportunities with impressive professional standard facilities at many, many US universities, which cannot be found elsewhere in the world. And then indeed linking from that is the considerable geographic diversity within the United States. You can go to universities where you can ski after class, you can go to universities where you can surf after class, and indeed, if you're clever enough, universities where you can ski and surf after your classes. So it's a brief bit of information there about why students might want to study in the USA, but I'm assuming, seeing as you are joining me this evening, that you've probably already decided that this might be something you, your child, or your students may already be considering. What I'm going to do over the course of this presentation, though, is to focus on five key things that I see in my work with students all over the world applying to the United States, and particularly here in the British Isles. 5 things I think students need to be aware of when they are considering applying to the USA, and hopefully this is useful information that will help guide you in this process. So my first point is to start early. There's a couple of reasons why, which I'll delve into, but I want to use this as an opportunity just to say that if you are used to one university's application system, so if you're joining me from Ireland or from the UK or from the Netherlands, and you have the own timelines that your university system works, it may be surprising to realize just how early you need to start to make successful US applications. But please take those preconceptions of how university works in your own country away and focus on the fact that you're going to have to learn new rules. An analogy that I use quite a lot is the difference between football in Europe and football in North America. And just as those are two very different sports with very different rules, so universities in Western Europe and universities in North America are very different, and you have to learn their rules as well. So the timeline actually is quite extensive, and this is my overview graphic of the sort of process we're talking about here. So students who are in year 12 now, in an ideal scenario, through the autumn and now into the spring, really should have been building their college list. I am actually in the moment working through all sorts of reports coming back to the students I'm working with, giving them data on the universities they have selected in their initial college list. So students are looking at 9, 10, 11, 12 different universities and starting to understand what their list of colleges might be. Now, following on from that, students will be meeting with colleges and connecting them via email. And that's important actually because a lot of universities from the United States will come through the UK in the autumn only. So students might have had the opportunity back in September or October to go to some of the events and fairs happening around the UK or Ireland and meet with admissions officers from students, from universities, and to connect with them. Following on from that, then students around about now are going to be starting their SAT or ACT preparation for the tests that most, though not all, US universities are going to need students to have. A lot of students will then either in the February half term or in their school holidays in April go off and visit colleges in the United States, and concurrent to that will be taking the various tests needed throughout the spring and into the summer. We're also going to then find that students throughout the summer term will be starting to request the references and the school materials, making sure that their teachers and their school advisors have got enough time to prepare the 3 references that US universities are going to need, and other documents like a school profile and a transcript that may be completely new to your school. And then the last part, but indeed the biggest amount of work in this process, is going to be working on the very many essays and submitting them to all the different application portals, which students really need to be starting at the very beginning of their summer holiday at the end of year 12, the end of the lower 6, and they will be working through the autumn term on that. Every year students tell me they'll be finishing in November. There's no chance they're going to be done. And I will be reading at least half a dozen essays on December the 31st ahead of the 1st January deadlines of students who have worked diligently but have just got an awful lot of writing to do. So the timeline is quite extensive. There's a huge amount of work to be done for US applications, but there is a particular reason why this timeline gets fixed as well. I'll touch in a bit more detail about these 2 tests, the ACT and the SAT, and a little bit more about the SAT subject tests. But part of the reason why students need to start earlier is that you have relatively few opportunities to take these tests as an international student. So students who are going to need to take the ACT or the SAT have a limited number of dates in which they can take them. And therefore, in order to prepare to do well on these tests, you're going to have to start in good time and make sure you have a coherent plan. Now, if you're also going to be applying to one of the relatively few universities that either request or require subject tests, there's another element here as well. And those of you who can very quickly look across the columns here will see that the SAT and the SAT subject tests sometimes happen on exactly the same date. You can't take both. So if you're taking the SAT and you also need to take subject tests, that's again going to restrict your timeline. So for the reasons, firstly, that there's a lot to do, and secondly, for the fact that the tests only happen at certain fixed points in the year, ideally students applying to the United States need to be well into the process really by February of their lower 6 year, 12 year. And actually, ideally, students who are going to be thinking about this process should be starting in the spring of their year 11, so they can really get a head start and possibly even go and spend some time on a US campus in the summer between GCSEs and starting sixth form, so they really can start to get their heads very much into how US universities work. Now, none of this is to say it's not possible to catch up and to get up to speed quickly, but students may find that they're playing catch up a little bit if they didn't know they need to be going early. So if you are listening to the call now and you or your child are in the lower 6 or in year 12 and you haven't really started this process yet, I really would strongly advise you to get into it, get going, get learning some things about the process. So the first point is to start early. Then the second thing that comes into this, the second key point, is know how to choose your colleges. And again, the preconceptions and the assumptions you might make about how students in the system you come from choose colleges, choose which universities to apply to, is going to be very different when you start to look at the United States. So 2 questions that I think are important to understand here about how people choose college is to try and get out of what you might think this process works by, when actually it can work in a very different way. So the first question is, what is the Ivy League? And I work with a lot of students who start off with the process saying, David, I'm coming to you. I want to work with you because I really want some help getting into an Ivy League university. But they can never define what the Ivy League is. The Ivy League is 8 universities in the northeastern part of the United States who play sports against each other. The term league is used because it's a sports league. They're not the 8th oldest, they're not the 8th highest ranked, and they're certainly not the 8th most selective US universities. But they got together historically because they shared enough characteristics that it made sense to be a sports league. Now, the Ivy League are all wonderful world-class universities, but actually they're also academically quite different from each other in terms of their offering. So students who are saying to me, I want to apply to the Ivy League, what I'm actually hearing is a student saying, I don't really know enough about how I'm supposed to choose universities. Because a student who's a really good fit academically for, say, Brown, probably isn't a really good fit academically for Columbia in terms of the curriculum that those two universities are delivering. So it's really important to understand, firstly, that choosing universities is much more than just saying, I want to go to something like the Ivy League and I don't really know what it means. There's more beyond that. Now, the second thing to understand is the second question. How many students are there in each year group in all US high schools right now? The figure for the current year 12 is there are 3.7 million year 12s, grade 11s they would call it, at high schools in the US. 3.7 million students. Now, the Ivy League is about 22,000 spots available. So not even the top 1% of academically high achieving students at US high schools can fit into the Ivy League. And so the point I give that statistic of the 3.7 million is to show that actually the top 5%, the top 10% of those students are still very impressive, very high achieving students. And those students are going to have to spread themselves up across maybe 100, 150 or 200 different universities. Now they're actually, depending on how you define them, over 4,000 US universities. So the scale of the system is so much bigger. So students who are starting to delve into these US processes need to understand it's not like the Netherlands or Ireland or the UK with a much smaller university system. You've got many, many more options there to consider, and options which will universities which will still be full with the creme de la creme, the most highest achieving students in the US system. To put some flesh into this, I've got some admissions rates here, and you can see some incredibly selective universities here. Now, some of them you may be aware of. We mentioned Harvard before. There's Yale here at 5.9%. We've got Penn, University of Pennsylvania, 7.4%. But you'll see universities such as Bowdoin at 9% admit rates. We'll see universities such as Swarthmore on here. We see Rice, and these are universities which are more selective than anything that particularly the UK has to offer, more selective than Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, and Imperial. And so students need to understand that there may be universities out there that they've never heard of, which really are world-class and are highly selective, that they're going to need to understand more about. So when you start to look at US universities, rather than just saying, I want to go to a really good university, of which there are a good couple of hundred, what students are starting to choose is what kind of university they want to go to. And I've got 3 examples on the screen now, which hopefully give an overview of that. In the middle, I have Dartmouth College. Dartmouth College is a member of the Ivy League, and it's a very selective university, and a university like the 2 others here, which are going to be looking for students who've achieved incredibly highly at school. But Dartmouth, as well as that, is also choosing people who can be a member of its community. Dartmouth is in the town of Hanover. Hanover is a small college town in upstate New Hampshire, about halfway between the town of Burlington, Vermont, and halfway into the city of Boston. It's on the edge of the mountains, it snows, it can be a relatively isolated place. And so as well as all the information that students provide about themselves, their academics, the references from school, students are asked to provide an additional reference to Dartmouth, which is a reference from a friend, a peer reference. Now, I find this as a really great example of how students need to not only fit a university academically, but they also need to fit the community. Because if you don't have friends or you don't have someone who can write that kind of a reference for you, then you're probably not going to fit into the small town environment, the small, potentially isolated community of Dartmouth. And so it's not just about what you want to study and kind of how good you are academically, it's also about matching that community. Now, in contrast, the American football game picture I have here is UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles. It's a very big university. The last few years, they've got over 100,000 applications per year. And when you apply to the University of California system and to UCLA, students don't provide any materials from their school whatsoever. No references, no predictor grades from schools, nothing at all. But it's a very complicated and large university with actually quite difficult bureaucracies to navigate. In fact, if anyone's been to Los Angeles, the same could be said of the city. So a student who's going to thrive in the environment of UCLA, though academically as strong as a student who's going to thrive at Dartmouth, is going to have a different set of personal characteristics. They're going to need to be able to be independent, to cope on their own, to be able to deal with issues when necessarily without people around them to deal with things. And that's a different person who might thrive in the small town, snowy environment of Dartmouth. And then in contrast, again, New York University, slap bang in the middle of Manhattan, also with campuses in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai. And students are going to succeed at NYU are going to need to be really comfortable in a very urban and international environment. Again, very different from a student who might be able to thrive at Dartmouth. Now, I could go on and on and on with drawing out these examples and indeed give more and more examples. But there's a whole piece of how US students choose colleges, which we don't really do when we're looking in Western Europe, about not just fitting the academic level of a university, but being a really good fit for the educational experience and the cultural community that that university is seeking to build. So for students who are coming to this process of looking at US universities completely cold, you need to learn much more about US universities. It's not good enough to know, I really want to study biology and I've got 3 A's and maybe I hope I can get a 30 on the ACT. Where can I go? You need to really understand what do you want out of this US university experience and to go on from there. Now, it gets even more complicated when we do delve into the nuance of the academics. And another question I pose here, and you can have in your mind, is what do you think you'll study if you go to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? Now, when I give this talk in schools, most people will say, oh, it's science, it's engineering and maths and things. And actually, I'm asking this question deliberately because for MIT's Bachelor of Science degree, the only degree that they offer, students have to complete a core requirement. So every student will study a core curriculum. And that core curriculum is going to be equally divided between science and maths on one hand and humanities, arts and social sciences on the other. So a student who's going to MIT, even if they want to study physics or biochemistry or applied mathematics, is still going to have to take class in the humanities, class in the arts, class in social sciences. So yes, potential engineers want to go to MIT, you might still have to study Shakespeare. Now, this is a very different system to what students looking at UK or European universities might be like. And a student actually wanting to study, say, engineering or physics at MIT might think, well, I don't want to do humanities. I don't want to do the arts. That's great. So don't apply to MIT. Apply to a university which has designed its own curriculum in a way that you won't have to do those things. So I need to give a little bit more detail here about how the US educational system works. Certainly at the high school level, but this example I can give you is at the university level. So to take the contrast of a UK degree, the analogy I use here is it's like going to a restaurant and ordering a set menu. If I go into a restaurant and I order their set menu, I will be given that set menu. If I go to a UK university to study history, I'm going to be given a degree in history. So it's all going to be the same. It's all going to be topics to do with history. There may be some variation in there, but that's what I'm going to study. Now, if I go to a US university typically, and I want to study history, I want to quote unquote major in history, most likely only a third of the classes that I would take would be history. So unlike the set menu analogy for a UK university degree, in the US it's buffet style. So the question then is, well, if only a third of what I'm doing is history, what's the other 2/3? Well, that other 2/3 is where that difference about choosing the right universities comes into this, because that variation in the other 2/3 will differ from university to university. Now, typically speaking, it's going to be broken into two components. Some of it will be things like at MIT that the university says you have to study. So the university might say you have to study classes in humanities, in arts, in physical sciences, in life sciences, potentially even in physical education. Columbia University very famously asks students to take a swimming class. The final bits could be any other things you want to take. So I might be studying history and would love to learn Mandarin, or love to take a class in anthropology, or love to study abroad for a semester. Well, because it's a buffet style process, I can potentially do that. Now, these two processes also work in tandem in how the assessment works differently. Because a UK degree is typically final assessment, study for the first year, take some exams, pass those and move on, study for the remaining of your degree, maybe do some coursework or a thesis, but also be assessed by final exams, and that's how you get your degree. You are going to be on this set menu, always following this pathway. Whereas in a US university, you're going to be assessed continuously. So if I did go to major in history at a US university, I'm not going to be admitted to study history. I'm just going to be admitted to that university because semester by semester, term by term in British parlance, I'm going to be given grades in each class that I take. So that means if I went in and took a lot of classes in history and decided actually after that first term, I don't like history as much as I thought I did, but I really did enjoy that class in anthropology and that class in Mandarin, then I bank those grades. I've already got them. I've been given those. They're on my report. And then the next term, I might take more classes in those other subjects. So it's a massively flexible system enabling students to move between academic disciplines, possibly come in with absolutely no idea about what they want to study, or indeed a very fixed idea of what they want to study. And at the end of the 4-year degree, come out with a degree majoring in something completely different, something potentially they'd never even considered studying when they entered university. Now, because as I mentioned, you're not applying to study a subject at university, apart from in some very particular cases in the US, you're just applying to be a student at that university. How this academic change works, how the particular structures of a university enable students to take particular classes, is going to be a fundamental point about how students choose where to apply to in the United States. So I've shown an example of MIT on the one hand. I'm now going to show a contrasting example of Brown, which has no required core curriculum or distribution requirements, apart from the fact that students do have to be able to demonstrate excellent skills in written English. So despite perhaps popular perception, if you just want to study maths, then Brown may be the better place to do it because you have complete freedom to design your own curriculum. Whereas that hypothetical mathematician going to MIT may not want to be taking a class in Hamlet for a term and having to go on and also do some other things as well. So hopefully that's given some detail about how it's really, really important to choose the right universities. And I will say for the work that I do working with students, it's an area where a lot of students fall down. The amount of work students can put in at this stage of the process early on in the lower six and year 12 to really understand the nuances of universities makes the whole application bit, the essays that students have to write, so much better. My third point that students really need to be aware of is to understand how finances work when we're talking about US universities. More broadly, applying outside a country where you have the right to access a university system, so in the UK, for example, the right to go to pay just over £9,000 and to borrow those fees from the British government. Going outside that system means that you're always going to have to consider finances. But unfortunately, I find a lot of families and students don't have the open conversation at the start about how affordable a US university education might be. So the financial elements available in the United States can typically be broken down into 3 situations. If you are a student who is in the fortunate situation of not requiring any financial assistance, then that's great, and this section may not be important to you. But most people will require some element of financial support to access the process. And so I'm just going to touch on these 3 elements. The money that students can receive from a university will, broadly speaking, go into one of these 3 categories. The first one I'll actually touch on is sports. Sports and sports scholarships for the United States is a fundamentally different process from everything I'm talking about here. If you have joined me this evening to learn more about sports scholarships, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. It would be at least an hour's webinar in its own right. If you do want to know more about sports and how you might be able to get a full or partial sports scholarship to University of the United States, please go to my website, universityguide.com, click on the link for the podcast, and you'll find a couple of podcast episodes which delve into detail with that. So I'm going to take that to one side. The other 2 will apply for students regardless of whether you're looking to play sports or not at University of the United States. And that money can be given in 2 different ways. The money could be merit-based or it could be need-based. Now, merit scholarship is based exactly on what it says. It is money for being meritorious for something, for being good at something. And there are significant amounts of merit money available, up to full scholarships at very prestigious US universities. But in order to get a merit scholarship, you need to do 2 things. Firstly, to check whether that university does offer merit scholarships to international students. And I'm not giving any secret information here to say that the Ivy League do not offer any merit scholarships. And secondly, in order to get that merit scholarship, are you going to be a really, really good applicant to that university? If you're looking at a university and when you start to understand how they may select students, the sort of academic range they're looking for, and you look like a middling or lowish applicant for that university, you're very, very unlikely to qualify for one of their merit scholarships. The university will give a merit scholarship to their very best applicants. So students who are looking to get a merit scholarship from a US university need to target their applications at universities that they're really, really strong for. In a British analogy, it might be a student who's a really, really strong candidate for somewhere like Imperial, but if they got into Imperial, they'd just be as good as everybody else. Deciding, actually, I'm going to go to the University of Surrey or Royal Holloway, because I'll be one of their best applicants and they might give me the money that I need to go. Now, in the US, people make these decisions all the time. Harvard actually only yields 85% of its offers. Only 85% of people who get into Harvard choose to go. And a lot of those students who are choosing to go elsewhere will be going somewhere else because they've been offered the merit scholarship at a slightly less well-ranked university. They're good enough to go to Harvard, but they don't necessarily qualify for any money off. So they'll go to somewhere that really wants them to go that might have offered them an 80, 90, or even 100% scholarship. So if you are looking for merit scholarships, it's got to be a really targeted search. Does that university offer merit scholarships? Does it offer merit scholarships to a student with my passport, and typically an international passport? And am I going to be a really good applicant for that university? Now, the second element is need-based aid. And again, fairly obvious from its description. Need-based aid will be based on an assessment of the family's need. The students who apply for need-based aid just have to get into the university. Once you get into the university will then be making calculations based on its own models of what they think you need to afford that education. Now, that model will be based on a fairly forensic assessment of your family's income and indeed assets. And you can go onto the website, say again, Harvard or Yale's websites, and find their financial calculators and see what that calculation might be. Now, the Ivy League do offer need-based aid, and an increasing amount of US universities do also offer need-based aid. So it is perfectly possible for people who just want to go to the best university they can get into and not worry about targeting themselves at somewhere maybe they feel they're too good for to get merit scholarship. You can go down that process and get money. However, within the need-based situation, it's worth being aware that there's a difference between universities that will look at the amount of money you're asking for when deciding whether you get in or not, and which are completely, quote unquote, need blind when deciding whether you get in or not. So again, there's much more nuance here to understand. The big thing really, again, with this process is to understand if money is a part of the need that you have to find university in the United States, you need to plan ahead. Your entire strategy of where you apply has to be informed by how much money you might or might not need to go. I and others who do my kind of work get really sad emails in April or May of a student of a 6th year saying, I've been admitted to this university, can you help me find some money from them? And we have to go back and say, they've admitted you thinking you can pay all the fees. They probably now don't have any money to give. And actually, you probably wouldn't have got any money from that university. Your whole strategy was wrong. So the finances really do have to be a significant part of this thing. The amount of money a student needs to study in the USA must be a part of the criteria when choosing where to apply. It can't just be give it a go and hope it comes through, because as I've mentioned, you could end up applying to universities which actually do not offer any need-based or merit money to international students. Fourth point to bear in mind then, and this is something where I'm going to delve into a little bit more detail about the SAT and the ACT, take the tests seriously. Testing really is a fundamental part of this process. Of these just over 4,000 universities in the United States, about 800 don't require the tests. But if you are deciding to go for a test optional admissions approach, that is going to be your criteria. Now, every year I work with 3 or 4 students who've decided they are never going to take an SAT or an ACT, they are never going to take one of these tests, and actually it could be a process where a huge amount of the stress is removed. However, if you are committing to that route, you will only be applying to the test optional universities. There are some very well-known test optional universities, NYU already one that's discussed tonight, the University of Chicago, an incredibly highly ranked and highly selective US university, also test optional. But if you aspire to a Stanford or a Yale or a Penn, then you're going to need to do the tests. Now, it's worth me pointing out that there are actually 2 tests. There is the SAT and there is also the ACT. The SAT is the one with better marketing, it's the one that's in all the films and the TV programs, it's better known. But actually the ACT is the more popular test. It is sat by more people worldwide. It is certainly sat by more people within the United Kingdom. And about 3/4 of the students I work with will actually end up doing an ACT over the SAT. Why? The SAT is a test of 2 sections. One is a reading and writing section, and the other is a maths section. The ACT is a test of 4 sections, and only one of those 4 sections is maths. Now, a lot of students in the UK educational system stop maths at GCSE level. And so if you're not doing maths for your last 2 years, doing a test which is half maths may not be the best idea, and potentially the ACT might be better suited to you. There's more nuance to it than that, but it's worth saying that there are 2 tests. Students can take diagnostic tests run by various test prep companies. UES being the one that I would recommend, to have a free diagnostic test online. You can find out which one of those two tests you're suited to. They are equally accepted by every university, so just because you might not have heard of the ACT, please don't discount it. I've talked about subject tests, and these are going to be recommended or required by a relatively small number of universities. They are also run by the SAT, and they are content-based tests. Now that's complicated because the content in the SAT subject test is an American curriculum content. If you're going to be pursuing the sciences and subject tests in things like maths and physics and biology, there is some overlap between A-level and IB subjects. However, if you're on the arts and humanities side, what you would study in a multiple choice US history SAT subject test is going to be incredibly different from anything you might be doing in A-level or IB history. So again, if you're preparing for university entry to universities that require subject tests, there's going to be a chunk of new stuff to learn there. Now, when to test is really important. As I mentioned, there are relatively few opportunities to do it, but when to test is also going to be impacted by the universities that you are choosing to apply to. Huge numbers of students will just go and take an SAT or an ACT speculatively, see how I did, without actually realizing about how the universities they may consider to be applying to are going to use those tests. Some universities will ask to see every single time the student took a test. And if you are competing for the mythical last spot at a university and it's you v somebody else, and you got that 32 on the ACT after 4 attempts, and the other person got it first go, and the university has no other way of deciding between you, who would you give that spot to? So it's really important to not go into an SAT or an ACT without really knowing what your overall strategy is. There's a thing called super scoring, where universities will combine maybe the scores you've achieved on 2 tests on the SAT, or even potentially 4 tests on the ACT, and take your best component score and add it together to make a new super score. Depending on what you've studied at school and what processes you're going to look for, you might actually decide to take the subject tests first before you take an SAT or an ACT. So when to test it is going to be very much informed by your strategy. How to prepare is also very important. These are tests that are designed for an American curriculum, and they're also tests that work on American testing philosophy. I don't know many students in the British system who've gone into a Saturday morning and spent 3.5 hours doing multiple choice tests. And yet a lot of students will turn up without having done any practice on this kind of stuff, thinking they're going to achieve as well. Like any test, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And students really do need to do a lot of work very seriously preparing for the tests. Every year I will work with students who have not prepared enough for the tests, and they may be 3 A-star students at A-level or 45 IB, out of 45 IB students, and yet their test score on the ACT and SAT does not reflect anything like their true academic potential. And because of that, they have to either decide to go for test option admissions, or in some cases choose not to apply to the United States at all, because they didn't put the amount of work in to do the tests. The key advice to how to prepare is get yourself in a position where you only need to take the test once. Once you are so confident going into it, you've done enough preparation, you've done maybe a full mock test, that you know pretty much what you're going to get. Take it once and move on. The final thing to bear in mind with the testing is actually how you send the scores. It's not like a UCAS application where you have to put all your information together, because different universities will use the tests in different ways, and indeed some of them won't require them. Which test scores you send to different universities is also going to be informed by the strategy. So, for example, a student maybe with a 28 on the ACT, a pretty good score but not phenomenal, but maybe with 3 A's prediction grades at A-level, might decide to apply to New York University and not send those scores. But potentially they might also apply to Fordham and Hofstra and send those scores. Or maybe they've achieved a super score over 3 different testings of the ACT, and so for Wagner College, where they really want to get a merit scholarship, they might send 3 sets of scores. So the strategy of how you send scores is going to be informed by the different universities, and hopefully from this you've seen it's much more complicated than just whacking in a serious grade into a form and the universities will deal with it. There's a huge amount of strategy that has to go into this. So the biggest issue then I see, just to restate, I see each autumn is quite significant mismatches between students' predicted grades from the school and then what they've gone on to their tests. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And then the last bit, the last element I'll talk to as I come towards the last few minutes of the webinar, is to prepare properly for the application essays. Now, I talked when I was discussing how to choose universities about how students have to find universities that they fit. They fit academically, but they also fit socially and culturally. Now, how do universities work out how a student fits that university? Well, they work out by asking students to write things about themselves and potentially how they fit the experience of a university. So students applying to the United States will write one what we call the Common App essay. The Common App essay is named after the Common Application, which is the main application system that students will use, though actually you will potentially have to use the Coalition application, the Georgetown application, the MIT application, the University of California application. There are many different application systems. But you'll write one general essay that is an insight into the character of the student. On average, the students I work with apply to 8 colleges. And most colleges will, on average, ask students to write 2 essays each. So we're talking about 400 to 650 word application essays. Then, if you're doing it sensibly, maybe you'll write at least 3 drafts of each essay. You can do the maths and work out there is a significant amount of writing to be done here, which is why you need to start in July and hope to finish in December. This year, looking through my notes, I reviewed 450 odd drafts of application essays in the United States, giving feedback and comments and guidance on where students' essay drafts were and what they needed to do to improve them. These essays aren't just about, like the UCAS model, I want to study biology, here's how good I am at biology. Because you're not applying to study a subject at university, they have to be about different things. Now, within these application essays, we've also got to then bear in mind that some of the universities are going to want to know how interested you are in them. There is no application limit in the United States systems. You could apply for 50 or 60 universities if you wanted to. So universities don't know how well they'll yield you. And because they are ranked by how many of their application offers they make their yields, what the percentages of offers to places, they need to offer as few spots as possible. So they will track the level of interest the student has made in that university, potentially as a factor in whether you get in or not. That can be done by you visiting with them or meeting with an admissions officer when they come to your country. It can be tracked by a thing called pings, which is the digital engagement you might have had with the university, following them in social media, opening emails that sent to you. But you also demonstrate that interest in the essays that you write to those universities. You're going to also have to then explain, looking at your social and extracurricular profile, how that also matches that university, because these universities are running holistic admissions. They are not just looking at your academic grades, they're looking at how you fit their community. They're going to want to know the sort of person you are in the community. I mentioned at the start that you will get 3 references from your school, 2 from subject teachers, and 1 known as the counsellor reference, typically written by a head of sixth form, a house parent, or a house tutor. And that references are all going to be about you as a person. You're going to have to work hard to make sure you can get good references from your teachers and your counsellors. The university wants to know, have you shown any leadership? They're going to want to know, have you taken on any initiative? Have you started clubs? Have you played sports? Have you done music and drama? And potentially also, have you spent your summer? What have you been doing in your summer activities to make yourself a more well-rounded candidate? So all these things then come into this common essay, the general essay. These are 3 of the 6 different questions students are asked. And the questions are there to draw out these ideas. How are you as a person, and what sort of person will you be on our campus? Now, actually, the 7th question you can do is essay of your choice. So even if one of the 6 questions, and these are just 3 of them, doesn't fit you, you can write about anything else you want to. So again, it's not about I'm really good at business or I'm really good at chemistry. It might be talking about a traumatic event that happened in your life, or talking about an experience that really transformed you, talking about a topic that you find so engaging, talking a particular element when you challenge somebody. And I really enjoy working with students in these essays and drawing out these phenomenally interesting stories about them, which in many cases have very little to do with their academics. Then, to demonstrate interest and to find these fits, students are also going to have to write college-specific essays. Now, not every university asks for these essays just for them, but the more selective ones do. A very nice one is why us? So NYU very famously asks, why do you want to come to NYU? And that's an element where you really can demonstrate that level of interest by doing huge amounts of research into the universities and explaining to a university, I want to come to you because I want to take this class with this professor and I want to marry that with this residential life opportunity and match that with this study abroad opportunity. But some universities take that a step further and ask these quite quirky essays. Now, these are 3 actual questions from the most recently completed rounds. So students applying to University of Chicago or Georgetown or LMU for entry in 2020 will have had to deal with these questions as some of the options to deal with. And these are not easy questions. What does it mean to be educated? Talk about a situation that demanded critical thinking from you. Or cats have 9 lives, Pac-Man has 3 lives, and radioactive isotopes have half-lives. How many lives can something else, conceptual, actual, have, and why? So these are essays that take more time, they take more thinking, and they are designed again to see whether academically, socially, and culturally you as an applicant fit that university. Universities can also ask short answer questions. This is an extract from Princeton. This is actually what the common application looks like. It's had a slight graphics refresh since this. You can see Princeton's prompts on one side of the screen here. On the other side, Princeton are asking you some short answer questions. What's your favourite book and its author, your favourite movie, your favourite website, and so on and so forth. So again, much more information about you here than you might actually initially think is going to be necessary. Then, to make it even slightly more complicated, these essays and references and things are going to have to be submitted, as I mentioned, to many different application portals. The common application being the most common one. The coalition, unlikely that you'll deal with unless you're applying to some of the public flagship universities, but that might be a case. Anyone applying to the University of California system, and that's not universities in California. Anything is known as a UC, so UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC Davis. They have their own application. Similarly, so in Texas. And then some universities will only accept an application direct to them, so Georgetown and MIT being 2 very famous examples. The essay requirements are going to be different, the timelines are going to be different, and indeed how everything in terms of testing and college choice interacts with them is also going to be different. And linking to that as well, and where the essays that demonstrated interest in your own profile can have a huge impact, is the fact that we're not talking about one single deadline here. Typically speaking, we can divide the application deadlines into the 3 on the screen here. Early action, early decision, and regular decision. Early action most commonly has a deadline of November the 1st, and it's very simply you apply early and you will hear back early. There are nuances within that, whether university will let you apply early action only to them or to more than them, but it's typically a non-binding commitment. Now, early decision is a binding commitment. A student could apply early decision, again, typically an early November deadline, and applying early decision has to also be countersigned by a parent or guardian and by the student's school, because when you're applying early decision, you are saying to the university, if you offer me a spot in your university's class for the next year, I will definitely come and I will withdraw every application I put in anywhere in the world. Now, universities offer early decision, and not all do, but they offer a decision to try and yield as many people as possible. And you can see how that makes a difference. At Princeton, in the early action, we had an admit rate of 13.9%, and the regular round is 5.8%. There are some US universities that, through an early decision process, will be filling 40 to 50% of their spots, even before the regular decision deadline that comes in January. So all these pieces of the puzzle of understanding how the essays and the application portals work together is not something that can be left to, say, October or November of your 6th year. This whole plan has to be fitted together, so when you know which essays you have to do and when by, you have everything ready in time. Now, I've rushed through some of those bits as well, and I could potentially have done an hour on each of those topics, but I really like to do in these webinars to give people a big overview of 5 things to consider when looking at US universities, and potentially 2 big messages to come into this. The first one, this may be much more complicated than you thought it was going to be, and secondly, where to get more help. I and the people I work with in my team run a 3-step process. We like to say, first of all, we will help you explore where in the world you want to apply. Once you have that done, we'll help you work out, depending on your choices, what you need to do to be able to apply, and then support you with the applications. For US universities, we will offer this as one combined package of application support, but also with 3 individual packages. We also enjoy working with students applying to universities in Europe, in Canada, and across Asia, where potentially there's less to be done, and all these 3 things come together. If you would like more information, please do contact me via the details on the screen now. The email is david@theuniversityguide.com. My telephone number is there. I can also be contacted via SMS or WhatsApp, and I'll leave the little QR code on as well. If you have a mobile phone on you, well, if you're not using it to listen to the webinar, you should be able to hold the camera app over the screen. That will pop you up to a link where you can sign up to get my newsletter, and it will also give you an email with links to all sorts of interesting articles from my blog on universityguide.com. It would be my great pleasure to have any follow-up conversations with any of the parents or students on the call. My first initial consultation is completely free of charge for half an hour of my time, and to see whether I might be able to help help you with any of these elements. As I say, there are all sorts of free resources and podcasts available at theuniversityguide.com. And if you're listening to the call and you're a school advisor, a counsellor, or a teacher, I'm very happy to try and see whether I can come and speak to your school, speak to your students, speak to your parents, or indeed offer my help in any way I can. So it's been my great pleasure over 45 minutes or so to talk to you about 5 key points with US university applications. Thank you for joining me tonight, and hopefully I look forward to speaking to some of you soon.